Alright guys, and now I want to talk about provocation in chess. And the first example I have on this note is actually Mikhail Tal, the master provocateur, playing against Klaus Darga. So what is provocation, to be specific? Provocation is basically saying, can you please do this, which I know is bad for you. Okay, so for example, if we cause our opponent to push a pawn up in order to kick away our knight from the center, and in doing so they made a weakness on d6, then that's provocation. If we cause our opponent to play something like g6, which weakens their dark squares and the whole color complex, we've provoked them into making mistakes. In this case, Tal is going to say, can you please take the pawn on e5 so we can take on c6 and win the rook? And that's also provocation, right? Of course, not everybody will fall for it, because it doesn't mean that black has to go for your provocation, but it's still powerful nonetheless. All right, so provoking is basically getting something from them that we want, okay? By getting them to do something, because we couldn't do it ourselves. We couldn't create the weakness ourselves, so we get them to make it for us by doing what we want them to do. All right, let's take a look at how this works in a real game. All right, for example, e5. We are breaking through, we're opening up the f-file, and Tal is saying, before you get to castle and consolidate and get a stable center, probably something like d5, c5, I'm not going to let you do that. I'm going to break up your pawns. And after I break up your pawns, you have not only weaknesses on c6, a6, but also the open files to worry about in front of your king. After black takes, of course, black cannot take twice. That's the whole provocation over here, but he can retreat to many places. For example, he could have also went to knight d5, but he assessed that the e5 pawn is more important than the central outpost. After knight d5, there could be some tricks, including knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. Now, luckily for black, he still has queen c5 at the end of all that, so I don't think Tal would go for it right away. But at some point, this knight can actually be kicked away by c4, which is why I don't think he wanted to go there in the long run. Even though in the short term it looks good, it was actually a provocation by Tal to kick away the knight later on. That's why poor Klaus had to run away to d7 and attack the weakness and say that I've actually provoked you into making a weakness on e5, which is an isolated pawn. But Tal doesn't think so. Tal thinks that it's a great pawn because it's cramping black's pieces, right? It's one of those cramping pawns. So then after castle knight e4, we get a lot of outposts for our knight. We get a lot of space. Our pieces are good, and we're slowly getting to the king, slowly but surely. Bishop b7 makes sense, activating pieces, but queen h5. This is the master provocation over here. All right, what is going on? Why queen h5? He actually has tactics in mind. Already here, Tal is considering something like knight f6, knight takes, pawn takes, and then if bishop d6, I have either bishop e4 right away, or pawn takes and later bishop e4. And in that case, life will get very sad. For example, something like knight f6 takes, bishop d6, bishop e4, g6 is also provoked in order to stop mate, and we have the smooth finish queen h6, queen g7, which means they cannot afford to waste time. They have to kick my queen away if they don't want to get mated on the light squares, which are very weak right now. Why are the light squares weak? Because the light square bishop is nowhere to be seen, right? He's so far away that we don't care about him. That means they have to kick away the queen. And if they kick away the queen, like they did here, we've provoked more weaknesses. For example, dark squares. Even though this pawn is slightly weak, they can never really take it. So after queen e2, there are all kinds of pins on this diagonal, which means knight takes e5 is extremely scary and should probably be avoided. But even if you don't take the pawn, what are you going to do? Open up your bishop. That usually makes sense. You get some more scope for your pieces, but here we happen to have tactics. Knight f6, and we go for this very sharp position. After bishop takes, pawn takes, e5, it looks like the bishop has to run away and everything's all right for black, but actually he has more tactics. Bishop takes e5. And white is basically winning a pawn. After all these trades, queen takes, queen takes e5, and he's winning a pawn, plus he has dark squares. So then black has to be very careful. Black decides to go for rook b8 instead of queen takes. But we already provoked the weaknesses. We got what we wanted. So after the bishop runs back, we have one more provocation to do to finish off this game. Let's take a look. After knight d7, he's trying to chase off the important pawn, so we have to overprotect and win with the pin, right? Because now we also tied down the rook to the f7 square, and we're slowly getting into the king side. Maybe he was thinking about rook d1 using this pin as well. But first, he provoked black. He provoked black into taking this pawn. Because if black doesn't do anything, then black is just up a pawn, right? And 𝐴 could have played something like b3, traded off some pawns, and lived happily ever after. But why? Why, if we're okay with them taking? 𝐴 realized that in order to win this game, he needed a rook on d6 and a rook on d1. In order to get to the 6th string, in order to get here, he needed this rook gone. So he actually asked the rook to take the pawn very nicely. You know how he did it? By moving his king away. He's basically saying, can you please take my pawn? And 𝐏𝐨 said, sure, I will. And that type of provocation is what lost black the game. Okay, if he could avoid that, if he didn't take, he just kept the rook here, maybe black can still survive. He could push some pawns, but it's hard for black to come up with a move, like maybe queen d6, something like that. But it's really hard to play, especially since this pawn is now a weakness. Maybe before he should have gone for queen d6, but now it's already too late. After rook takes b2, it turns out 𝐴 and white has this amazing breakthrough, boom, rook e6. And the whole idea is that pawn takes check, queen g7 is coming up, and if you decide to run back, then we have the pin and win method, right? This rook is tied down to f7. That's why we needed the bishop where it is. And the other rook is coming to d1 to finish the game. And so black resigned. Black knows that next move is going to be very nice. It's bishop e6. Pawn takes checkmate, or rook takes d7 coming up. Okay, so here the provocation worked wonderfully. And first, we could provoke weak squares like this. Second, we provoked bad moves. And also, we provoked their knight into going to bad positions, right? By kicking him away by playing e5. And once that he was gone from the h7 pawn, we could attack the line squares, which is what he did. Now, the next game is a bit unexpected, because you would expect someone like, I don't know, 𝐴 to be the provocateur, to be a great attacker provocateur, but it was actually someone a bit quieter, someone a bit less dynamic, someone by the name of Petrosian, who was known for prophylaxis, among other things. It turns out that Tigran Petrosian could also attack very well, who would have thought? And in this game, he's going to checkmate another world champion who did not survive the opening. Let's take a look at why. Okay, here Petrosian is already a little bit better. His bishops are a little bit stronger, but black is very solid. First, we're provoking them into pushing the pawn to h6 or g6, because he cannot castle right now. He can't not castle over there, right? But even if he castles here, he loses h7. That means he has to play something like h6 in the long run. And so after we castle, we don't even have to move the queen away. We can just keep it there because of all these queen takes c8 tactics. That's why white just castles and says, go on, you were going to castle? Go on, do it. And black has to play h6. The second he played h6, he already has some weaknesses that we provoked, but we're just getting started. Rook d1, this guy does have to worry about the queen, because in the long run, here comes bishop h7 check, and the discovery will win the queen for white. Okay, that's why black has to run away. And then let's get the bishops in place. That's where the bishop belongs. Make sure there are no discoveries. And finally, we need to create more weaknesses. How do we provoke them? Queen a4. We need to get the queen in front of the bishop. That's why he's going for queen e4, provoking more holes, such as g6. If you have to play g6, you already create more weaknesses on h6, which is really sad. And the g6 pawn isn't very safe either, so I can start attacking it with queen g4. After queen g4, they have to play h5, so we provoked h5 as well. We provoked h6, g6, and now h5. So many provocations that are just ruining black's positions. If he doesn't play h5, I was going to take on g6 myself, after which mate is coming. Okay, h5 makes sense, but we can just go back and threaten things like g4. We say, I'm going to blow up your roof if you don't stop me. Oh, you want to stop me? Great. I provoke more weaknesses, because now all these dark squares are weak. And he had to try and stop g4. Like, what else could Smyslov do? But after he plays f5, now we have a new weakness, which is e6. All right, let's go after e6. Bishop c4. Now that we provoked it, we can use it. And this part is just using the weaknesses we created. King f7, fantastic. Let me just use this pin that I've created on your pawn. Because my queen wants to get back in the game, I want to soften up your king side just a little bit. Just a little bit. Queen f4, okay, not a problem. Rook e1. How about we get to your light squares? How about we get to bishop takes e6 and all these light squares that you're trying to patch up? You can never take on e4 because of queen takes e6. Okay, and if black decides to trade, he's free to do so. And we're fine with that, because first of all, we can take on f5, and he cannot take since we're winning a pawn with the intermediate move f takes g, right? He cannot take here. And even if he takes back first, so in the game he decided to take the bishop, he's going to lose anyways. If he took on f5, he will get very sad after bishop takes e6. So he kind of had to take the bishop. He had no choice. We provoked him into taking the bishop and leaving our queen alone. After the queen survives, then the king is not going to survive. Pawn takes g6, king has to run away. If the king decided to take, he would get checkmated on the king side. Rook takes is coming up, queen f5, and that looks like a brutal attack coming. So that's why the king ran away, tried to get to safety, but not a problem. Use the pawn. Let's, oh, he's trying to block us, eh? Oh, no worries. We're just going to pick up some more pawns, chase the king around, and after they try to defend the king, it's okay, let's break through. At this point, we don't need to provoke. We've already done the provocation, right? And the provocation yielded us the open king, who we're happy to attack. After knight takes e5, knight takes e5, it's game over because of the fork, and otherwise bishop d6 or rook takes d6 is coming. So black decided to resign. The great part in this game was somewhere around here when he came up with this idea of queen e4, then queen g4, then queen h3, threatening g4, then bishop c4, all these moves that provoked black into making concessions, into making moves like f5, h5, g6 that he would never play. No good player would usually play that, but he had no choice. So you can provoke weak moves out of your opponent if you know what you're trying to get.